With the recent shakeup in Argentina and Javier Milei, the now president of the country, sitting within the throne in the pink house, well, it appears that he has taken his chainsaw to action and is now slashing regulatory measures, releasing his austerity program, and going after government employees. And in doing so, we can see that this has led to a major upheaval from the people in Argentina, the leftists and the socialists consistently protesting in the streets and doing so with the big bankers. Quite interesting that. And what do we see? Well, Milei's actions have led to the fact that Argentina's rental economy has now opened up, boomed, and blossomed. While we understand the fact that these people are suffering from a hyperinflation structure that is uncomparable to anything that people within the United States could possibly even hope to understand, well, what you have to realize is by opening up the market and allowing this is only going to make it more feasible for people, even that akin to the socialist left who despise people like Javier Milei, to thankfully be able to get homes far cheaper than what they were having to pay prior. Because the market had been regulated into the dirt, and because of this fact, it was only impoverishing people further by making it harder for people to find homes. Let's go ahead and throw it into this video and break all of this down. My word, it's hard to imagine anyone more disingenuous than a regime hack journalist like someone who would work for The Guardian, because, my word, these people are either so stupid they can't understand anything, or they're so dishonest that they will gladly obscure any framing as long as it means that it leads you to the end that they desire. It doesn't matter if that end goal is nothing more than subjugation to the standards of the state. No, that doesn't matter. All that matters is you have to listen to us because we're the noble truth tellers. Don't you worry, we won't ever address our bias. We won't ever tell you why we approach things the way that we do. We'll just deliver you a specific framing, poison the well, and then expect you to believe everything we say, because why wouldn't you? We're the person standing at the front of the room with the microphone, so certainly you should trust us. Now we jump into this article. Javier Milei's radical economic policies for Argentina met with protests, which was always going to happen. This was understandable. New Libertarian president accused of drawing up a battle plan against working people. My word, again, like I said, it's hard to imagine someone being more disingenuous or just straight up stupid than a Guardian journalist, or just a journalist who works for the regime class anyways. So the thing we have to address here is, and I let's say take a lot of pop shots at leftists and socialists on this channel, but understand that I actually used to be a socialist, and only through realizing that you don't have to abandon your identity in the pursuit of wanting what's best for everyone is how I stumbled into libertarianism. Because I realized that understanding that I had, that I wanted children to have food on their table, I wanted them to have a good education, I wanted them to have a roof over their heads, I wanted families to be well taken care of. I was like, well, this is just exactly how everyone should feel. Why wouldn't everyone want everyone to be taken care of all the time? Only a bad person wouldn't want that. And what I realized is the thing that actually stops people from getting to this point is the state itself. It is what hinders so many people from actually being able to achieve the prosperity that so many on the left so desire to see so many people achieve. And this is something that many on the right have no understanding of, because they just see someone who's left-wing and they see someone who's advocating for something that they disagree with and they just act like that person's a villain. That's not how this works. That's not how you approach this. Because many of the people who are of the left-leaning perspective, their initial intuitions, they're right. They want children to not go hungry. They want them to have homes. They want people to have jobs. They want people to have good education and live good lives that are worth living. That is a noble ideal, but what they don't understand is the state itself is what stops people from being able to achieve that noble end. Now we jump in. Javier Milei's radical economic policies for Argentina met with protests. New Libertarian president accused of drawing up a battle plan against working people. Thousands of protesters have poured onto the streets of Buenos Aires after Argentina's new president announced a far-reaching emergency decree containing dozens of controversial economic measures, a move one prominent critic compared to the actions of an absolute monarchy. Javier Milei, a radical libertarian economist who was inaugurated less than a fortnight ago, won power promising a dramatic shakeup of Argentina's moribund economy and rampant inflation and widespread poverty. On Wednesday night, Milei appeared on television, flanked by 12 stony-faced ministers and top officials, to unveil a decree he claimed he would use to overhaul the South American country and pull it out of the economic hell that we are now living through, he says. Milei's decree paved the way for the privation of state-owned companies, stripped away workers' rights including maternity leave, ended limits on exports, and altered housing rental and land ownership laws to allow for foreign investment. Milei also tipped his hat to the right-wing billionaire Elon Musk, who endorsed his campaign by announcing changes to Argentina's satellite internet, marketing that it would allow the entry of companies such as Starlink. Today is a historic day for our country. After decades of failure, impoverishment, decadence, and alienation, we are today formally starting to take on the path of reconstruction, Milei said as he outlined what is known as his shock therapy chainsaw plan. Milei, who last week devalued Argentina's currency, the peso, by more than 50% and suspended all public works, said his country required an urgent change of direction to avoid disaster and hyperinflation. This change begins today. The policies delighted supporters of the wild-haired far-right populist who is often compared to the former president of the US and Brazil, Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro. One of the happiest moments of my life, tweeted ally Ramiro Mara, but they infuriated the opposition and many ordinary citizens who took to their balconies immediately after the president's 9 p.m. address to protest by banging pots and pans. Soon the dissent spread to the streets as people began blocking roads in different parts of the capital. By the early hours of Thursday, thousands of protesters had congregated in the plaza outside Congress where Milei had been sworn in on December 10th. It's very clear there are lots of leftist and socialist and communist types in Argentina who simply aren't in favor of the actions being taken by Javier Milei, and something that's interesting to approach this with is a standard of objectivity, because like I've stated, their initial preconceptions of what they desire for people to live, in that of a more prosperous and dutiful future that is worth living, something where they can live and have sustainability. Well, here's the thing. If that's the standard that you so desire, how is it that you, the socialist, the communist, the leftist, feel about Javier Milei deregulating the housing market and with it making a major boom in access to the actual rental units themselves, as well as lowering the price of them? What would your approach be there? Because you want people to be able to have prosperity, to have homes, for children to have homes, to have a roof over their head, to have food on their tables, and to have what? Good education. But to have things like this, parents need to be able to provide it, and they need to have money to do so. So if they're not able to get this home, it will be cheaper, as well as the fact of also having more money now because the homes are cheaper, so they can then spend that money on things like food and other, let's say, goods that will create further prosperity for their children. Does this not make you have a thought that, wow, government itself and the hyper-regulatory landscape that it visits upon us is exactly what causes this outright turmoil? Let's go ahead and jump into Al Jazeera. Defying protests. Argentina's Milei unveils decree to deregulate the economy. President plans to eliminate or change 300 regulations as part of the economic shock therapy. And that is most certainly what a country suffering from 145% inflation rate and an exchange rate changing by the day absolutely needs. Economic shock therapy. And many people that I've seen in the journalist class talk about the fact of, well, this is just terrible. He doesn't care about the people of Argentina. Look at the actions that he's taking. So you're saying that this is wrong, that he's actually trying to tackle the problem and doing so accurately to the point where he's actually giving people, I don't know, relief in that of the housing market so they can have cheaper homes. You're saying that they should just sit there and wallow in nothing more than the pity and despair that consistent inflation and the escalatory rate with which it is rising will visit upon them? You absolute ghouls. This is what happens when you have people that don't know a single thing about economics working in the journalist class that will sit there and write what? Pieces about economics. And we go over here now. Argentina's Milei signs decree to boost exports and deregulation. And deregulation is most certainly what the government of Argentina needs, considering it is regulated to the nth degree at every single nook and cranny around every avenue of that economy. And well, what do we see? When deregulation strikes, so does the rent law going to death. And what do we see? The rent law is dead, the supply of apartments in Cava has already doubled, and prices are falling. What does the socialist mind have to say about this? When regulation is cut, people achieve further prosperity. What does that make you think? Maybe it's that government is the thing that actually hampers people's prosperity in the first place. Now on Davos media. The market triumphs. Milei manages to improve rent prices with deregulatory measures. And now we go over here to the red state. Argentina's Javier Milei unveils his austerity budget to crush inflation and crony capitalism. Austerity just being cutting government spending, if those of you are unaware. Well, here's the deal. Crushing inflation is what's most certainly the most relevant factor for the people of Argentina, and I've been talking about this consistently for so long, and I'm just so happy to finally see a way for them to tackle this, and a way for some of the people within this country to hopefully just have a little bit of the weight that's been put on their shoulders from the economic hellscape that they've had to orient themselves through because of 20 years of Peronism, finally just have a little bit less weight that's bearing down upon them. So maybe they can stand a little taller, and with it, look to the sunlight to realize that there is a future that's worth standing for. And because of the fact that Argentina is now fighting for what it means to stand for free market capitalism, there is now a real chance for you to achieve that prosperity. And now, here's something else we're going to go through. Argentina's Javier Milei proves the market, not government regulations, provides affordable housing. And the way we'll be going through this is not in this article specifically, but in an article from the Cato Institute. And I thought this article from Cato was phenomenal. This one's all right from Red State. It's written decently well, but it's not compiled nearly as well as what's coming up from Cato in just a moment. And something that I absolutely adored recently with Javier Milei was his speech that he gave to the WEF. And my goodness, met with nothing more than applause. He sat there in the middle of the World Economic Forum's den, staring the lions straight into their jaws, their salivating, bloodthirsty mouths, and the likes of Klaus Schwab and the rest of his ilk. And what did he say? Collectivism, socialism, and statism itself is the problem. Klaus Schwab believing collectivism and the creation of a global governance system, and with it, subjugation to that is the creation of what is most noble and true. Effectively, Javier Milei calling his system nothing more than what creates degradation among human beings, which is an incredibly fascinating mindset that you can think about Klaus Schwab running himself through the mental gymnastics of, because if you haven't read Klaus Schwab's books on things like the Great Reset, well, you're probably not fully aware of what's going on with the nature of how he approaches these things. I made a video talking about Klaus Schwab and his approach to libertarians specifically. That will also be linked above me. You can go check that out if you're interested. And what do we have here? Argentina's anarcho-capitalist president cheered at Davos, and I just have a second version of this article up, I guess, because I was trying to get it to load. I've been trying to bypass this paywall for the past 20 minutes because for some reason, archive.org simply isn't working for me, and I was really hoping I would click on this and we would have access to go through it. But nonetheless, we don't. What we will be doing now, though, is jumping into this article from Cato, and my goodness, Ryan Bourne did an absolutely phenomenal job. I've got my issues with Cato, and I don't like how they approach certain things because I feel like they toe the line of the regime at certain points. But man, we always give credit where credit's due, and where it is most certainly due is in that of Ryan Bourne and his phenomenal article that he has written about how Argentina offering a textbook study and why rent controls are a bad idea. Milei took his chainsaw to rent control and other tenancy regulations. The result has vindicated economic theory, the supply of rental accommodation is surging, and rents have tumbled. In his ascent to the Argentinian presidency, Javier Milei was distinguished not just by his libertarian ideology, but also for his pedagogic approach towards economics. On the campaign trail, he would regularly articulate the basic principles of market economics. Now in government, the fiery libertarian shock therapy is turning those lessons into hard case studies. Within Executive Decree 70/2023, translated as Foundations for the Reconstruction of the Argentine Economy, Milei took his chainsaw to rent control and other tenancy regulations. The results has vindicated economic theory. The supply of rental accommodations is surging and rents have tumbled. A form of tenancy rent control was introduced in Argentina in 2020, and many British and American progressives would like to do the same. Tenancies were mandated to a minimum length of 3 years, and permissible annual rent increases were cappable at a weighted average of inflation and wage growth. Both measures aimed to provide tenants with more economic security. Landlords were still free to adjust rates between contracts, but ending tenancies prematurely was basically impossible. Deposits were capped while rents themselves had to be paid in pesos. Economic theory grants us predictions about these regulations. Tenancy, rent control, and contract length regulations burden landlords with more risk of obtaining submarket rents with tenancies and being stuck for 3 years with troublesome renters. On the margin, this makes it more lucrative to sell properties for owner occupation, list on excluded short-term rental sites like Airbnb, or even just leave properties empty. By reducing the supply of traditional rental homes, this raises the average level of rent even if the growth of rent is capped within minimum length tenancy contracts. An environment of high inflation worsens these risks for landlords. With surging prices, it makes sense to change rent levels more regularly. This allows tenants and landlords to find contract provisions to make sure rents both reflect market realities and tenants' ability to pay, as wage growth often lags inflation. Yet these regulations only allowed rent adjustments once per year or twice from October 2023. High and volatile inflation thus interacts with these regulations to raise rent and vacancy risk. Given the sharp jumps in rent, landlords might therefore like to hedge against inflation by charging in another currency, like dollars, but this was prohibited too. The results of this were predictable. Around the policy's introduction, it's estimated that 45% of landlords stopped renting to instead sell their properties, not least because most home sales were made in dollars. A lot of landlords shifted to short-term rentals on Airbnb too. In 2019, Buenos Aires had 10,000 properties listed on Airbnb. Now it's over 29,500. There have thus been no end to stories of a rental housing crisis, with tenants unable to find rental accommodations, despite the Financial Times reporting late last year that energy use implies 1 in 7 homes in Buenos Aires, the capital, lay entirely empty. This supply crunch led to soaring rents. Bloomberg reported that rents jumped sharply after tenancy rent controls were announced as landlords opted out of the market or front-loaded rent increases to protect against inflation. Having been falling in real terms through 2018 and 2019 and tracking inflation for most of the previous decade, rents in Buenos Aires grew at 1.7 times the pace of inflation in 2020, broadly tracked inflation in 2021 and 2022, and then accelerated much faster than inflation again in 2023, as the rate which rents could be increased within tenancies was tighter, furthered to the lowering of wage growth or inflation. As a result, the average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Buenos Aires has surged from 18,000 pesos per month at the end of 2019 to 334,000 pesos today, far above the 210,000 pesos if priced had merely tracked broader inflation as used to happen. This relative price hike obviously hurts the poor the most because they cannot easily afford deposits to buy homes or more expensive shorter-term dollar rentals. Controls on rents with tenancies also surrounding landlord-tenant relations, incentivizing landlords to forgo expensive maintenance, thus allowing the value of the property to fall towards its regulated price or to encourage tenants to leave. Misallocation of properties was rife. Reports in Buenos Aires described friends having to share apartments further out of the city center, meaning cramped conditions and longer commutes. Under such controls, people enjoying sub-market rents are incentivized to stay in properties ill-suited for them, while others must leave properties they can afford prematurely when rents adjust sharply before their wages rise. One of Milei's first acts in his decree scrapped these damaging regulations for all new contracts. Rents will now be decided in free contract negotiation, meaning no more central bank indices capping rent increases. He's also scrapped the 3-year minimum contract length while also making it legal for rents to be paid in foreign currency, i.e. dollars, providing landlords a hedge against inflation. Already, the reduced risk to landlords is leading to a rebound in the rental supply. Broker Soledad Bayan has shown a 50% rise in notices for traditional rentals since the decree. A host of other sources, including the Argentine Real Estate Chamber, have confirmed large supply jumps. Perhaps unsurprisingly, reports show new rental prices falling by between 20 and 30% so far. Economists have frequently cautioned against traditional rent controls that apply caps on rents within and between tenancies, but in recent years there's been a new drumbeat for providing more security for tenants by controlling rents within longer, secure tenancies. Argentina's experience provides a textbook warning of how this policy can backfire and more grist to Milei's educational mill. The Cato Institute with an absolute banger and Ryan Bourne just doing a phenomenal job on this article. If you were someone who is unfamiliar with the nature of how regulatory capture and government ends up affecting things like the housing market and how this ends up applying to the rental structure, well, this was a phenomenal article for your foray into understanding how this affects it. And my word, as I've said, Ryan Bourne, good job. I'm looking forward to jumping into seeing what other things he's written either for Cato or other outlets. We're going to go ahead and finish this off by looking at something from the Wall Street Journal just real quick. Argentina's president promised a free market revolution and says he's delivering. There is no plan B, Javier Milei tells the Wall Street Journal, as his moves to privatize state companies / government jobs has sparked inflation and protests. And here's the deal. Something that the Wall Street Journal most consistently never does is give you the facts, give you the information as it is, because they're nothing more than that of the regime stooges that will sit there and completely avoid the fact that the people of Argentina were already suffering from extremely high record bouts of inflation. They were already dealing with societal collapse, but all the Wall Street Journal would love to do is pin it on the shoulders of someone like that of Javier Milei, blaming people like this for the current inflation in Argentina, which is absolutely ridiculous. That's like Barack Obama walking into office day one of his presidency, and everyone looks straight into his eyes and says, you're responsible for $12 trillion of debt. Every single penny spent that led us to this point, that's your fault. That's illogical and it's completely nonsensical, and it's not how inflation works, and anyone who understands anything about the market economy realizes this. So what we see is Javier Milei saying there is no plan B. Well, he's absolutely right, because we're at the precipice which would be nothing more than the tipping point for society. We either go the way of liberty or we go the way of outright totalitarianism. And it appears that Argentina is certainly taking the snowball towards that of prosperity and freedom, and I really hope that the rest of the world can see them as a guiding light to follow along this path, because there is no other plan B. We either strive for freedom and independence of the individual, or we are subjected to nothing more than tyranny. Thank you for watching. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, tell someone you love them. Peace out.